Ready, set, go! Let's see who can run the fastest.
I'm gonna beat you, Daddy! Whee!
They are men who will carry your children at your funeral, while their pockets are full of everything they stole from you. And the most dangerous thing about such a man is that you will never see him coming, because he arrives wearing the face of a friend. James Okafor was a good man who built a good life, and the only mistake he ever made was believing that the person he trusted most was made of the same honesty he was. Long before the betrayal, before the tears, before the courtroom and the reckoning, there was a man named James Okafor, and his life in those early years was the kind of life that makes other men believe in possibility. James had not been handed anything. He was the son of a schoolteacher and a market woman, raised in a household where money was counted carefully, but dignity was never negotiated. From them, he learned two things that would define him: that honest work was the only work worth doing, and that the people you choose to stand beside you matter more than the plans you make. He built his business from almost nothing, a small real estate and logistics firm that he started in his late 20s with little more than ambition, a second-hand desk, and a belief so stubborn it bordered on madness. He called it Okafor and Associates, even when there were no associates yet, because he always believed there would be. He met Mary at a friend's wedding. She was laughing at something across the room, and he decided, standing there watching her, that he would spend the rest of his life giving her reasons to laugh like that. He was, in this regard, a man of his word. They married, they built, they grew, and what had been one man's careful dream became, with Mary beside him, something far larger and far more alive. Mary was everything he was not. Where James was quiet, she was expressive. Where he saw the structure of a thing, she saw its people. She brought warmth into the business the way she brought warmth into their home, naturally, without effort, as though it simply followed her wherever she went. Together, they were a complete thing. When their twin daughters arrived, born on a soft Thursday morning, the rain falling gently as if the sky itself was celebrating, James named them Adaeze and Chisom, a daughter of the king. God is with me. Two names, two prayers, one hope that everything they had built would outlast them and find its way into the hands of the people they loved most. The business grew, the home grew, the family grew into itself. They hired staff, they signed contracts, they expanded into new properties. People in the neighborhood spoke James's name with respect, not because he was flashy or loud, but because he was consistent. He did what he said, he paid what he owed, and he treated people as people, not as instruments. Those who knew him well said James Okafor was the kind of man who made the world feel safer just by being in it. He was also the kind of man who trusted too completely. Not foolishly, he was not naive, but he believed with the certainty of someone who had never once been betrayed by someone he loved, that the people close to him were made of the same material he was, that loyalty, because he gave it so fully, would be returned in kind. This belief would cost him everything, though by the time the cost was revealed, James Okafor would no longer be alive to pay it. Marcus Dike had been in James's life since university, since the days of shared rooms, broken ceiling fans, and meals that were more hope than substance. They had survived lean years together. They had laughed at the same jokes, argued over the same ledgers, celebrated the same small victories. When James started his business, Marcus was the first person he called, not the most qualified person, the most trusted. James gave Marcus equal partnership, equal shares, equal authority, equal stake in everything they were building. He did this not because it was the smart business decision, most advisors would have counseled him against it, but because he believed that trust, when it is real, should be backed by something real. He wanted Marcus to know that this was his as much as it was James's. He wanted him to have skin in the game. For many years, this arrangement worked beautifully. Marcus was the face of the business in ways that James was not. Charming, confident, the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately made everyone in it feel like they had been expecting him. Clients liked him, contractors respected him. He could close a deal with a handshake and a story that left everyone feeling like they had won. But Marcus had a hunger that went beyond success. It was a hunger for possession, not just to have, but to have more than others, not just to succeed, but to be the one who succeeded. And as the years passed and the business grew, as James bought more properties and updated his will and spoke openly of building a legacy for his daughters, something inside Marcus began to shift. He smiled through every conversation about the future. He raised his glass at every celebration. He stood beside James at every milestone and called him brother and meant it, in the way that men who are planning betrayal often genuinely mean the things they say, right up until the moment they act against them. He was waiting for something. He did not name it, even to himself. He simply felt it. A door that had not yet opened, a moment that had not yet come. And then the truck came around the bend on a Tuesday night in November, and the door swung open, and Marcus walked through it before the dust had even settled. It had been an ordinary evening. James and Mary had attended a charity dinner, the sort of event they never missed, because giving back to the community was not something they did for appearances, but something they did because they believed in it. On the drive home, the city lights were moving past the car windows, and Mary was resting her head against the glass, and James was humming something he could never quite remember all the words to, and they were talking about the girls. About how Adaeze had started walking with her chin in the air like she owned every room she entered. About how Chisom had invented a private language that she only spoke with her twin, a whispering code that made the two of them dissolve into giggles that neither parent could ever decode. James had said something that made Mary laugh, that same laugh, the one he had crossed a room for at a wedding years before. It was the last laugh of her life. The truck came from a blind bend. Overloaded, poorly maintained, its brakes long past due for replacement. There was no warning, no moment of preparation, no mercy in the physics of it. There was only the sudden, terrible violence of impact, and then stillness, and then the rain falling quietly on a road that would be cleared and cleaned and driven over again by morning, as though nothing had happened there at all. By sunrise, James and Mary Okafor were gone. In the nursery across the city, 2 4-year-old girls were sleeping. Adaeze with her stuffed rabbit, Chisom flat on her back with her arms spread wide, the way she always slept, as though even in dreams she was making space for everything. They did not know. They could not have known. They would spend the next 15 years discovering, piece by painful piece, the size of what they had lost. Marcus arrived at the hospital before dawn. His face carried grief like a man who had rehearsed it. He wept in front of the doctors, in front of the lawyers, in front of anyone who was watching. He spoke of brotherhood. He spoke of a bond that death could not dissolve. He said that James had been more than a friend, more than a partner, that he had been family, and that he would honor that family by caring for those children as if they were his own. People believed him. Grief, when performed well enough, looks identical to the real thing, and Marcus had always been the best performer in any room. What no one noticed, because no one was looking, because grief blinds us to the things that should be obvious, was the speed, the quiet, methodical, indecent speed with which Marcus moved through the paperwork of a dead man's estate. Within 30 days, he had transferred controlling interest in Okafor and Associates to himself. Within 60 days, the business accounts had been redirected. Within 90 days, the home that James and Mary had filled with love and laughter was listed for sale. He forged signatures, he altered property documents, he destroyed the original will, a will that James had updated just 1 month before the accident, a will that was perfectly clear in its instructions, everything in equal shares to his twin daughters. Marcus was named administrator only, temporary custodian, the man who would hold things in trust until the girls came of age, not owner, not heir, caretaker. Marcus made sure no one would ever read those words. The business was renamed Dike and Partners Group. The properties were absorbed. The savings vanished into private accounts. The legacy that 2 people had spent their lives building was repackaged, redistributed, and consumed with a speed and thoroughness that would have been impressive had it not been monstrous. The girls were moved into a small house on the east side of the city. Marcus told them, when they were old enough to be told anything, that their parents had died broke, that he was the reason they were alive, that the world was hard and they had better learn that early. He gave them just enough to survive, not enough to question, not enough to rise. He believed, with the confidence of a man who has never been genuinely challenged, that poverty would be sufficient to keep them quiet forever. He did not know his daughters, because they were James's daughters. 15 years is a long time, long enough for a city to change its skyline, long enough for a man to forget the weight of what he has done, long enough for 2 little girls to become women with iron in their spines. Adaeze and Chisom grew up the way a seed grows through concrete, not because the conditions were right, but because the life inside them was too stubborn to be denied. By the time Adaeze was 12, she was working, not helping, not contributing, working. She sold cold drinks and ground nuts and anything else the market would move. She learned to read people the way her father had once read contracts, quickly, accurately, without sentiment. She learned that the world does not pause to feel sorry for you, and so you must move while it is moving. Chisom was quieter, more patient, more interior. She repaired things, shoes, clothing, small items that neighbors brought to her with the implicit faith that she would fix them, because she always did. She had a memory like a clean steel surface, holding everything that touched it without distortion. She listened more than she spoke. She observed everything. She forgot nothing. Between them, they made a complete person. Adaeze's fire and Chisom's depth, Adaeze's momentum and Chisom's precision. They had grown up with almost nothing, and yet they had, without knowing it, inherited the best of both their parents. On cold nights, in the small rooms they shared, they would talk about their mother and father in the way that people talk about people they remember mostly through feeling: the warmth of a kitchen, the texture of a laugh, the weight of a hand in their hair. The memories were worn smooth from years of handling, like stones polished by water. They pressed them close anyway. Something had never sat right with them about the story they had been given. People in the neighborhood spoke their parents' names with a reverence that did not match the poverty they had been handed. Old women would look at them with eyes too full of something to be only sadness. Men who had known James would lower their voices when the twins passed, the way people lower their voices near something sacred. The girls felt it. They could not name it, but they felt it. Marcus, meanwhile, had grown fat and comfortable on stolen ground. His office was polished mahogany and imported leather. His suits came from abroad. His name appeared on property hoardings across the city. He had built himself the life that James had built, or rather, he had built it on top of James's life, the way a man plants a garden over a grave and tends it carefully so no one ever has reason to dig. He thought of the girls occasionally. He told himself that he had done them a kindness, really, that the harshness of their upbringing had made them strong. He was the sort of man who had, over 15 years, convinced himself that he had actually been generous. Such is the power of the human mind to protect itself from the truth of what it has done. Her name was Ekanem. She had worked in the Okafor household for 11 years, from the day James first opened the house to visitors, through 2 pregnancies, through the twin girls' first steps and first words, right to the graveside where she had stood in the November cold and watched 2 coffins go into the ground while Marcus Dike wept beside her. She had seen his eyes that day. She had known then that the tears were performance. But she had children of her own and a life she could not afford to endanger, and so she had made the choice that people in powerless positions are often forced to make. She stayed silent. She carried the secret the way old people carry old injuries, quietly, managing it, working around it, never mentioning it, never truly free of it. But she was old now. Her children were grown and safe, and the weight, after 15 years, had become unbearable. One evening, as Adaeze and Chisom were returning home along the narrow street where Ekanem lived, the old woman called to them from her doorway, just their names, softly, as though she had been saving her voice for exactly this moment. Inside her small room, in the light of a single bulb that swayed slightly when the generator coughed, Ekanem opened a wooden box that had lived under her bed through every move, every year, every attempt to forget. She removed a yellowed envelope. Inside it was a certified copy of James Okafor's last will and testament. A law clerk named Tunde Afolabi had kept it. He had been working at the firm when Marcus had arrived 3 days after the funeral and demanded, with the polished menace of a man who knows how to threaten without raising his voice, that every copy of the will be surrendered to him. The senior lawyer had complied. Tunde had handed over what he was asked for, but his hands had been unsteady the whole time, and when he went home that night he could not sleep, and by morning he had made a decision that he would keep to himself for 15 years. He had kept one copy, just one, certified, stamped, signed, tucked into a folder in his home, untouched, waiting for a day he hoped would come. The will was clear. James Okafor left everything, every property, every business share, every account, to his twin daughters in equal measure. Marcus Dike was named administrator only, with authority lasting until the girls turned 18, not 1 day longer. Adaeze held the document in her hands for a long time without speaking. The room was very quiet. Chisom read every word twice, slowly, then looked at the old woman across the table with eyes that held 15 years of rain in them. And Ekonem said, "I have waited for you to be old enough to fight. You are old enough now." The case of Okafor versus Dike was filed in the High Court on a Monday morning, and by Wednesday it was the talk of the city. Not because lawsuits were rare, the courts were full of them, but because people love, with a deep and quiet love, the story of the small standing up against the large, of a truth so long buried that no one believed it could still breathe, of 2 women from the east side of the city in plain clothes and with nothing behind them but an old woman's testimony and a clerk's conscience, walking into a courtroom and demanding back what was theirs. Marcus was not concerned. He had navigated powerful rooms for 2 decades. He had money, lawyers, and the thick armor of respectability that money and time together provide. He looked at the twins across the courtroom on the first day of proceedings and saw exactly what he had always seen when he looked at them: 2 market girls who had gotten above themselves. He expected the matter to collapse before it properly began. He was wrong in every direction. Tunde Afolabi took the stand and told the court everything. He was nervous, his hands shook on the railing, but his voice was level and his account was precise. He described the day Marcus came to the law office. He described the pressure, the threat wrapped in pleasantness, the speed with which the senior partner had folded. He described the copy he had kept and why he had kept it. He submitted the document to the court and then sat through cross-examination with a steadiness that only comes from someone who has been carrying the truth for so long that saying it out loud is, above all else, a relief. Ekanem was helped to the witness box slowly, with the quiet dignity of a woman who has already decided how she wants the end of her story to read. She spoke of 11 years in the Okafor household. She spoke of the morning after the funeral, of how Marcus had moved through the house with an efficiency that she now described plainly as inventory. She described the calls she had overheard, the documents she had seen change hands, the moment she had tried to raise her voice and been silenced. Then she looked across the courtroom directly at Marcus without flinching and said that she had once been afraid of him, that she was no longer. Marcus's expression did not break, but something in him shifted. For the first time, he looked like a man on ground that was moving beneath him. The forensic accounting report delivered the final blow. The plaintiff's counsel had engaged a financial expert who had traced, with methodical precision, the movement of every significant sum from the Okafor estate in the months following the deaths. Account by account, transfer by transfer, document by document, 15 years of theft laid out in clean columns and annotated pages, presented to the court in language that left almost no room for argument. Marcus's lawyers attacked everything except the evidence. They called the will a forgery, the clerk a thief, the old woman confused, the twins opportunists. They built their defense on noise, hoping that enough noise might obscure the signal. It did not. The judge took 3 days. He was a careful, thorough man, the kind of judge who reads every submission and asks the question that cuts to the center of the matter. On a Friday morning, in a courtroom so full that people were standing in the corridors to hear, he delivered his judgment. He found for the plaintiffs. All properties and assets improperly transferred from the Okafor estate were to be returned. Damages were assessed. The matter was referred to the Financial Crimes Commission for criminal investigation. Marcus was ordered to surrender his passport. The courtroom erupted. Adaeze sat very still for a moment. She had been composed through all of it, through every session, every attack from the opposing counsel, every moment of doubt in the small hours of the night before each hearing. She had worn her father's discipline like armor. But now, in the silence after the judgment was read, something moved through her that was too large to contain. She pressed her hands over her mouth and breathed out, slowly, slowly, the way a person breathes when they have been holding something in for 15 years. Chisom rested her head on her sister's shoulder and wept, not with grief, with something the two of them had almost forgotten was available to them: relief, justice, arrival. Marcus Dike did not go quietly. He appealed. He hired new lawyers and changed his strategy and tried every door that was still available to him. But the truth, once it has surfaced, does not go back under. He had spent 15 years ensuring that certain things could not be found. Now that they had been found, there was nothing left to manage. His accounts were frozen, his properties were seized one by one and transferred to the rightful owners. The business associates who had praised his generosity and celebrated his success began to step away from him. Carefully, quietly, the way people step back from a man who was falling so as not to be caught beneath him. The criminal case moved more slowly than the civil one, but it moved. Within 2 years of the original judgment, Marcus appeared in court to face charges. He was convicted on 4 counts of fraud and 1 count of criminal misappropriation of a minor's inheritance. He received 5 years. He sat in a courtroom, in the same kind of room where he had once expected to win, and listened to a judge pronounce a verdict on the life he had constructed, and he wore the expression of a man who finally, fully understood the price of what he had done. Not remorse exactly, not repentance, something quieter and harder than either of those, the recognition that the bill had come. It is worth pausing here to say something plainly. This is not a story about a man being destroyed. Marcus destroyed himself. Every choice, every forgery, every manipulation, they were his own. He was not driven by poverty or desperation. He had been a successful partner in a growing business. He had more than enough. His hunger was not for survival, it was for dominance. And that kind of hunger, the elders teach us, is one that cannot be fed, only indulged until it consumes the one who carries it. The wealth he had stolen did not make him free. It made him a custodian of something that was never truly his, always alert, always managing, always one document away from exposure. He had traded peace for possession, and in the end, he had lost both. The twins did not return to luxury. They had not fought for spectacle. They had fought for something quieter and more lasting than that, for the truth about who their parents were, for the restoration of a name, for the right to know where they came from. They reopened the business under its original name, Okafor and Associates. The sign was rehung about the entrance of the refurbished building on a morning when the light was golden and the air had the particular quality of a day that knows it matters. Adaeze stood before it with her arms folded and her chin raised, the exact posture she had worn at 12 years old over a cooler of cold drinks on a market street, when all she had was defiance and all she knew was that she was going somewhere. That same posture, but the weight behind it was different now. It was not defiance, it was arrival. Chisom stood beside her and said nothing for a long time, which was her way of saying everything. Ekanem sat in a chair nearby with a blanket over her knees, watching the two of them with the expression of a woman who has set down a burden she has been carrying for 15 years and is only now beginning to understand how heavy it was. In their first year of operation, the twins dedicated a portion of the company's profits to a scholarship fund. They named it after their parents. It would send young people from the same streets the twins had grown up on to university, because Adaeze and Chisom understood something that poverty had given them, pressed inside a wound like a gift they had not asked for, that when fortune turns for you, the most meaningful thing you can do is reach back. They were their mother's daughters, they were their father's daughters, and the legacy that Marcus had tried to bury was not only restored, it was extended, deepened, made more than it had ever been. Because some things cannot be stolen. Some inheritances pass not through paper, but through blood, through the way a person carries themselves, through the stubbornness that refuses to become bitterness, through the quiet insistence that the truth, no matter how long it takes, is worth waiting for.